task force leaders volunteer to work on this. So I think I have to hand over to you. It's better God to share with you the way from where we start and how we come up with this finding. And then from there, we go directly into the core content of our webinar. Ponge, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Chairman Saj and Fiona, for giving me this opportunity to share the research findings with the global audience. Actually, as Chairman Eric has just said, we did come up with this as one of the ideas of how we can entrench ethical protocol in evaluations in the African context. So the background of this was that we did some background study and came up with a draft protocol. And beyond that, we also did a survey on an African audience on their views about indigenous African ethical protocols. And this will constitute one of what we are going to share here, as well as the content of the draft protocol for your input. It has already been shared with some of you on email. In our preamble, I've got this from one of our Made in Africa greats, Chilisa, and his colleagues, who say in their book, in the chapter on conceptualizing evaluation in African context, which is actually edited by Fiona, among others. They say that in the process of carrying out any form of evaluation in African context, such an evaluation must be based on indigenized African evaluation conceptual frameworks that require evaluators to do the following three things, which I put in red: recognize, appreciate, and include. And what do they have to include? That's the African cultures, languages, values, ways of knowing, and knowledge systems. So what is the purpose of this ethical protocol? Generally, we've come up with three main purposes for the protocol. The first one is to promote the full implementation of ethical principles when engaging in monitoring and evaluation activities with the African people. The second one is to support monitoring and evaluation practices that respect, and the key word here is respect, the rights of indigenous African people, and their benefits must be critical for any monitoring and evaluation activity. Then the third one is that the ethical protocol is designed to be used as a framework for discussing ethical issues and for helping indigenous African people to recognize and resolve particular ethical issues that may arise in the process of monitoring or evaluation. Now, in trying to build a business case for the African ethical protocol, we do mention a few of the points here which are contained in the draft protocol. So maybe you could share your feelings about this. One is on the effectiveness of indigenous programs. Two, evaluator perspectives, because we find that if we have two different evaluators coming from different cultural backgrounds, definitely there's bound to be some variation in the evaluation outcomes. So these are some inherent biases which the evaluator is supposed to address. Then we have the tensions between the models and worldviews, and I think Victor did talk about this comprehensively, about the tension between the Western or European models and the indigenous laws or customs and worldviews. And lastly, the tension between Eurocentric frameworks and lens vis-a-vis what we may call the Afrocentric views and frameworks. Great. So why is this protocol important? The protocol is important in two main perspectives. One, it's going to enhance ethical dialogue between nations. Ideally, it seeks to ensure a respectful and ethical dialogue between nations and between people in relation to conservation and sustainable use of natural resources in the process of conducting evaluations, especially in the African context. And this one brought the idea of the 5 P's of the Sustainable Development Goals, where we have people, planet, peace, prosperity, and the element of partnership. So these are very key in developing this ethical dialogue between nations. And then most importantly, the respect to indigenous communities. So the overall goal of showing respect to indigenous communities in Africa is critical in this protocol. Main co-ethical principles that we've already included in the draft protocol and which are going to be modified and updated based on some of the ideas, the great ideas that we just discussed in the breakout rooms, are as follows. One, we've talked about the issue of credibility of accountability mechanisms as a key principle. We need to curb misappropriation of indigenous knowledge, especially misuse by evaluators without the knowledge or the authorization of the indigenous community or holders of the knowledge. We need to have meaningful consultation and participation, as well as respect for diversity. Then we have the issue of promoting the respect for rights of the indigenous community, enhance a sense of agency. That is, the evaluator should, as much as possible, practically possible, enhance the individual sense of agency as well as their ownership of the issues that they raise during the evaluation. Then this need for respect for indigenous knowledge, I think that one has really been addressed, and most of the groups did appreciate this. And respect for confidentiality. The evaluation team must ensure confidentiality is respected at all times. Yeah, and then what Wycliffe just talked about, the evaluation should be guided by the principle of do no harm, so as not to expose the respondent. So that's really key, Wycliffe of group 4. Then there's the issue of prior informed consent. At all times, the evaluator must have prior informed consent of the local community. Here we have consent at 2 levels. We have the individual consent as well as communal consent, given the communal nature of the indigenous African communities. Then the issue of inclusivity, I think many groups have talked about the issue of having a gender sensitive tool as well as the element of equity and inclusivity. Then building trust with participants, demonstrating to the local communities that you value their contributions and that you are actually going to benefit from the information that they share with you. Then there's the element of reciprocity, mutual benefit and equal sharing, especially of the benefits of the evaluation for purposes of learning, as well as making decisions about what needs to be done and what needs not to be done. Right. And lastly, but not the least, the evaluations should be led by the community, and they should address the needs of the local community. And the evaluator should at all times strive to establish positive working relationships with the local communities. That is, they should build mutual trust and cooperation between the local communities and the donors or the project implementers. So, for any further information regarding EvalIndigenous, you can get in touch with the co-chairs, that's Fiona and Eric Sage. And for any issues touching on the draft protocol, anyone who may have wished to say something but forgot, or maybe a new idea has just come to you, you can email me on the email address that is put down there. I think I'll be able to share with you the slides, all those who have attended today, so you'll be able to get the email addresses. If you want to join EvalIndigenous, you can talk to the two, send mail to the two, and if you have any ideas on the draft protocol, send to me.